Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this week's Snack, Chat, and Keep on Track Everything FASD. My name is Catherine Connors. I am one of the team leads and openness specialists here at the Dot for Life, and I am joined by the magnificent Valerie, who is our community engagement liaison with the Dot for Life. Now, unfortunately, we were supposed to have an FASD worker with us, but due to illness, she wasn't able to attend. But we still have some great questions and being able to talk from lived experience in raising children with FASD and, of course, supporting families. So I wanted to do something a little bit different this week. Instead of just jumping right into the questions, I wanted to share a few stats that we have on fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. Now, these stats primarily came from CAN FASD, and they're an amazing research organization that has really helped us move forward in a lot of supports and the most up-to-date data that we have for those living with FASD. So just a few stats here. The most recent study that was conducted in Canada is that the prevalence of FASD is 2.5 times greater than it is for autism. So we hear a lot of autism supports, and autism community is a very strong and amazing community. But a lot of people are surprised to know that FASD is actually 2.5 times greater. The other stat is that majority of the time FASD is misdiagnosed as ADHD. So a lot of times people who have ADHD are actually living with FASD as well. Or a lot of times, as most of us know, children get an ADHD diagnosis, then the FASD can come later. Only 5 to 7% of people living with FASD actually have the facial features. So most people have a typically developing face. And people with FASD are 4 times more likely than their peers to engage in the criminal justice system. So these are just some stats that I wanted to share that I know were very interesting to me. And as we all know, FASD is a very big spectrum. So you hear this a lot with the autism community, as well as that if you know one person with FASD, then you only know one person with FASD. So there it is. There are my stats for today. We're going to get going with some questions, but before we get into this, as always, we always like to share for you to please be mindful of the details that you're sharing about your children. So we ask you to refrain from using names, very detailed situations, because we just want to respect your privacy and confidentiality in that of your children. This is a public forum. It is something that's going to be shared broadly within social media. All right. Off we go, Valerie. I know we have a few questions, so did you want to start by asking the first one?
We got a lot of questions this week, so hopefully we can get through them all. And just remember that on the Facebook Live, if you want to leave questions in the comments, we'll get to as many of those as possible too. Okay, so first question, Catherine. I'm wondering how to explain to our daughter that she was alcohol exposed, as I'm worried how this will affect her relationship with BioMom when she truly understands that this was a choice. We want to empower her, but it's hard to think of how to speak of this in a positive way.
Yeah, and that's something that I personally struggled with, and we've been very public. And I also want to start off by saying that my children have given me permission to share this information, so I'm not sharing anything about my children or my family without their consent or knowledge. When we learned that 2 of our children had FASD, we were still in the relationship building phase with our children's first family, and we got this diagnosis. And my children, because they were a bit older at the time of the diagnosis, they understood. So they know what FASD is, they know what strengths they have and what some of the weaknesses they had. And we had to really, my children were 6 and 8 when they were diagnosed. And we really had to sit down to talk about how someone gets FASD. Absolutely, FASD is the most preventable childhood disability. It happens only when a birth mother or a pregnant woman drinks. That being said, I think that it's really important to also address a lot of the stereotypes with that. So depending on the age of your child, you also want to look into things like only 40% of pregnancies are not planned. A lot of time, women who drink alcohol, it happens before they even realize that they were pregnant. And for women who continue to drink or knowingly drink while they are pregnant, a lot of that has to do with misinformation and lack of education around drinking, as well as we have to get into thinking about mental health issues and other type of barriers and discriminations that people are facing. So I think if we're talking about how FASD happens, how you get it, absolutely, we need to be truthful. The conversation can't end there. We also have to talk about how amazing, loving people can make poor choices. We need to talk about perhaps sometimes people are just in a hard place in their life, and that having to drink or making the choice to drink during pregnancy doesn't mean that tummy mommy or birth mom doesn't still love you, because those two don't necessarily have to equate for each other. And it definitely isn't an easy conversation. Have it more than once, continue to have it. And depending on the relationship that you have with your child's birth family, please engage them in that conversation as well. And so maybe you're having a conversation with mom on the side and saying, this is what we know. This is what I'm thinking of saying. How are you comfortable with? What questions can you answer that I can't? So having everyone come together, sit down and talk about it is absolutely important. And don't be afraid to engage a therapist if needed. So if you need an attachment therapist to come in to sit down and have those conversations, make sure that you're doing that. Oh, sorry, you're just on mute.
There we go. I think that the use of the word choice is interesting, because we do have to remember that in the case of addictions, it's not so much about choice. Sometimes it's about getting through the day. I had a very interesting encounter with an adoptive mom several years ago from outside our community, who has a very strong, open relationship with her children's birth mothers, one of whom had drunk throughout the pregnancy and used various substances. And by the time, this is several years later, she's in a much healthier place. Birth mom herself was able to draw on her experiences and talk with both children and say, listen, this is what happened to me. This is how much I regret it. This is how it affected you. And she also spoke with them in their early teens about the genetic factors of addiction and how they had to be extra mindful if they were feeling under stress, that they could be at risk from this. So I think an initial grief reaction, learning that you have a condition that could have been avoided if your birth mother had taken other actions, like that's normal. And we need to comfort our children through that grief. But I don't think it needs to be a permanent anger or permanent grief. And there can be healthier things, healthier conversations that happen down the line.
Absolutely. And I think you raise a great point, Val, because I think for us as parents, we're always going to have our reactions and thoughts and feelings. And so we need to make sure that we've dealt with our own feelings before we even have those conversations. And again, having an open and honest conversation with their mom, if possible, about this, because you don't want to be providing information if it was a mental health issue, if this was an addictions issue, if this was, I didn't actually know I was pregnant for 4 months. Like those are all very different reasonings. And I think that it's important that if you're sharing information, that obviously needs to be age appropriate towards your child, but you don't want to share misinformation, and you want to share it in the light of understanding that the conversation isn't over, and it doesn't mean that people are horrible, or that, you can imagine the guilt that a lot of moms carry from hearing this. And again, there's so much stereotype and stigma against it. I think the more open we are to having these conversations and supporting birth mom as well in this, I think would be huge, because you don't want it to hinder their relationship. And sometimes that means taking a step back, having some conversations, then coming back together. So making sure that birth mom has support through this. Maybe she can see a counselor, or she can get support on how to have these conversations would be important as well.
Definitely.
It's a big question. It's a hard one, and there's no straightforward answer.
Okay, so another question here. How do you work with potential FASD? Should you tell the child? And should you do other work, such as trauma attachment work, and see if some of the symptoms, in quotation marks, resolve? So there, for example, we know that Mom may have used substances or may have drank alcohol, but there's nothing confirmed.
Yeah, and so we went through this for many years with our children, and the best piece of advice that we were told is you treat the symptoms, not the diagnosis at that point. So if a child is having major sensory overload, or if you can tell that their executive functioning isn't at an age appropriate level, or isn't at the level that you feel that it should be, you're going to be supporting those needs regardless of what the diagnosis is. A lot of children, especially who are adopted, I can tell you it rarely is ever just FASD. So it's never just one thing. It's always going to be, not always, it's often going to be trauma. It's often going to be FASD, often going to be grief and loss and transition. And of course, children just being children, going through their own phases in identity and all that type of stuff. So it's never just going to be that one thing. Absolutely continue to engage in those therapies. The best thing about this is that, and what I learned, because I'm actually a behavioral therapist, and so I am trained in ABA therapy, which is the type of therapy that you support children in autism. You can teach children with autism. So when my children came home, I went ABA crazy and had everything figured out on how I was going to, treat my children. ABA and FASD, they don't work, and you learn pretty quick that ABA strategies and FAS children. It was like this. And I was like, what am I doing wrong? And I realized through doing the therapy, what worked and what didn't. So absolutely continue to engage in those therapies, treat the child's symptoms. So if you're seeing they're having difficulties in certain areas, get the support in place, get the teachings in place, teach yourself as a parent on how to address it and learn as you go. And I mean, things change and you might get a diagnosis down the line. Maybe you'll get a different diagnosis, but definitely you want to be able to engage it. And as far as telling the children, again, I think because you don't have any real answers for them, focusing more on strengths and needs is a really great conversation to have. So generally speaking, I'm horrible at math. I have to use my fingers to count, but I'm great in creativity. And now let's talk about what you're good at and what you're not so good at, and kind of sharing your own strengths and needs and doing it with the children is a great way to kind of help them become aware of what their needs might be.
Catherine, I follow one question from that. If a child has been diagnosed with a condition where the symptoms overlap, for example, autism or ADHD, or one of many mental health conditions, and they've been prescribed medication for that condition, which is not going to help with FASD. Like, how do you navigate that? Because your child could be on meds for months, years, that are more harmful than beneficial.
Yep. And I think that's pretty scary, isn't it? That people just kind of, it goes back to this diagnostic soup, and then doctors are trying to help and they see that we're stressed and they see the children, they're not thriving, so they prescribe this medication. The thing that I have found is that pretty fast if it's working or not. So a lot of times children with FASD have significant adverse reactions. So I'll give you a great example is my son, diagnosed with ADHD, we put him on Ritalin. I gave it to him for 2 days, and by the end of day 2, he was manic. He was crying. He was just not himself, begging me never to give him these. And this was at 5, begging me never to give him. And I didn't know the difference. I mean, I realize now I should have done a bit more research, but I learned pretty quick. And I think part of it is learning to advocate for your child. And if your child was diagnosed something, or was diagnosed previously with something you feel isn't a good fit, have that conversation. Your child can have FASD, ASD, and ADHD at the same time. There are children who are that, but there's also children who just have FASD and the other diagnostics are no longer appropriate. So make sure that you're having that conversation. Don't be scared to question if you don't feel that the medication is the right fit. And you also don't need a diagnosis to get medication.
Okay. How can you make sure that the specialists that your child is seeing, so your child's psychologist or any therapists, your medical doctor, how can you make sure that they have enough knowledge about FASD to make that call and to give an accurate diagnosis?
And they don't always. And I think the biggest thing is asking those questions. Is how often do you prescribe? Do you prescribe these medications? How often do you see families like this? What is your background? What is your research background? Like for us, we had to almost do a little bit of shopping around. So we found a developmental pediatrician who specializes in FASD. Some family doctors will be like, yeah, of course I know FASD. But if you actually sit down and specifically question them, you kind of see there's a little bit of holes in that where their comfort level is. The province of Ontario also has Health Nexus was received a grant, and they have FASD workers. And so your FASD worker in your region can actually help you also advocate and find appropriate medical support. So if you don't know who your FASD worker is, after this webinar is, or this web series is over, I'm actually going to post a link with the contacts for all of them across Ontario so that you can know who to access and ask those questions, because it's imperative. You want to make sure that someone is competent in the field of FASD.
Okay. And who would you recommend getting advice from if you're looking, like if you're in a small rural community, for example, and you don't have access to city doctors who are seeing all kinds of things all the time?
It's hard, especially because there's lack of access. Sometimes there's not even a family doctor in your region, let alone one that's competent, right? Or has competence in this area. So definitely, I mean, virtual reality here is amazing. So definitely get a part of these social media groups here at Adopt for Life as well. We can help link you and absolutely figure out who your closest FASD worker is. And even if you aren't able to see them in person, pick up the phone and do what you can. There are consultations that you can do over social media platforms like this, and even through Zoom, where you can actually have appointments because the community realizes that it needs to be accessible. So definitely reaching out online to find out, and obviously contact your regional parent liaison as well.
Okay. So we have another question from a community parent. When do we start talking about this to our kids? Mine is 2, and I don't think that I could, as we still don't know.
Yeah, so I think especially at 2, we have to talk about things that are age appropriate. I think at 2, my children weren't aware that they had any learning differences from any other child. So I think at that age, it definitely isn't appropriate. I mean, absolutely. Do you want to maybe leave books around the house that have the words so that they can get used to seeing the word FASD? Sure. But even if it's not a formal diagnosis yet, I would be a little bit cautious about what you're sharing, because the last thing you want to do is start giving language to a young child developing and realize it wasn't the right language or the right diagnostics. So again, focus on the strengths. Do what you can to have your child socialize and be in with programs. Ask those questions and then get support. But there are some great books out there that you can access as well, talking about how to tell your children how to speak with them.
Okay, this brings me on to the FASD book. Would you like to talk about it, Catherine?
Great segment here. So I want to make sure that I am telling this information right, because this is actually brand new to us. So please excuse me just 1 second.
We have Miranda, the author of the book. She's on the Facebook Live watching as we speak.
Thank you, Miranda. So excited. Okay. So I apologize. My book is a little bit worse for the wear, but it's because I have children. I hope you guys can see this. Not very good at this, sorry guys. FASD and Me. And so this was written by the amazing Miranda. She is a part of the Adopt for Life community, and this book is called FASD and Me. And really, this is just a sneak peek for you guys, because this actually isn't even out yet. This isn't available just yet for self-order, but it will be through Adopt for Life. And I want to make sure that I'm absolutely giving kudos to those who were involved with it. So first and foremost, Miranda, who's the author, who's here right now, she did some amazing work to get this out on time. And none of this would have been possible without the support of Health Nexus. So Health Nexus actually provided the grant for us to be able to, us as in Adopt for Life, to be able to create this book. And I also wanted to let you know that this book is going to be officially shared in the upcoming Kids Brain Health Network conference. So that's when the actual reveal is. This is just literally a sneak peek. So if you have any questions about this book, Miranda graciously is here to help answer any questions that you have, but I'm going to show you a couple of pages. I hope you can see it, guys, and I apologize if you can't, but it really is a workbook for children. It has information about FASD, but there's also spots where the children can actually talk about their strengths, their needs, talks about the self-regulation piece, who you are as a person, because children are way far beyond their diagnosis. You can see my head peeking out, sorry, just trying to make sure you guys can see this. Safety concerns, the self-regulation piece, talking about some resources, guys. Resources are amazing. Miranda, I'm not doing this justice. So here it is. And the back has an amazing quote. I'll let you guys all read that.
Diversity is having a seat at the table, inclusion is having a voice, and belonging is having that voice be heard.
How awesome is this? So this is, again, a book. It was in collaboration with Health Nexus and Adopt for Life, and more specifically Miranda, who really took the lead to create this amazing workbook. It's something that will be available on our website, as well as it'll be available regionally through our support groups with our regional parent liaisons. So here it is, our little sneak peek. If someone wants a more closer peek, please let me know. I know I'm not doing a great job, but it's amazing. And I graciously was able to sneak one. And my son, actually, Miranda, I hope you're listening. My son was so excited for this. And his actual reaction was, wow, I actually get to write the book about me this time. Like his honest, we should put this quote in there. He was so excited that he got to control it and that he wrote the narrative about him. So a lot of times we find with FASD, it's very medical. And a lot of times individuals with FASD don't get a voice. So they can use this how they want to, whether it's for themselves to keep track, whether it's for educators, for workers, really anyone and everyone who your child wants to share information about. This is kind of the one-stop shop instead of having to bring all of the diagnostics. And obviously it's kid-friendly. So there it is. This is our amazing new book. And ours, I don't mean mine at all.
Catherine, there was a page in there that you opened at, and it's one where a child can illustrate what I want to be in life and what I want to do with my life. And I think that a lot of people really underestimate what somebody with FASD can achieve as an adult. So maybe you could speak a little bit to that.
Absolutely. So a lot of times, so again, going back to FASD is a spectrum. And so a lot of times you're going to see people with all different types of functioning level. A lot of times children with FASD, actually children and youth and adults, have above average intelligence. So they're actually, my son, for example, is very analytical, which I mean is great for him, and as a parent raising a child who's that analytical can be frustrating, but he's very maths, sciences, questioning things. Those are his strengths. What we see some difficulties is around the executive functioning skills. So that's when you kind of see, you hear people within the FASD community hear like the outer brain. So people with FASD more often than not are able to get married, hold successful jobs, complete school. What the support needs a lot of times looks like are around the self-regulation, the social skills. Absolutely, it can interfere with intellectual development, but absolutely people with FASD have so much to offer. A lot of times they're just so compassionate and they have a big heart and they want to help everyone. My children love to be helpers. And so I think that when we're talking about FASD and what that's going to look like for our kids, especially if they're younger, there are some pretty scary stats out there. And like I said, when we started this web series, there's a lot of pretty harsh stats, but that doesn't define who our children are, and that doesn't define what their quality of life is going to be. So absolutely, everyone has that potential.
Okay. Obviously, with any child who's adopted and who has experienced trauma, we see a lot of things bubble up at the onset of puberty. Like there's a shift in where the child is cognitively, the things they're thinking about. What could we expect to be the types of shifts we'd see for a child who also had FASD around the ages of 12, 13?
Yeah, and we find that, again, like every child, that varies a little bit, but you will typically see an increase in behaviors. A lot of times that is either physical behavior, so actually physical violence, physical outbursts. There can be a lot more verbal aggression that can happen. Sorry, I think my Amazon just delivered. So you want to make sure that your support, especially if you're coming up to those ages, like the pre-teen ages, you're going to start seeing a lot of shifts with any child who's going through that. But absolutely, that self-regulation and that social skills piece is going to play a bigger part, because a lot of times it's around this age that children start to realize that they have a bit more social differences, or that they aren't able to react or respond the same ways as their peers. Obviously, that's also when sexuality starts to develop. So if your child starts to have interest in dating or in sexuality, you want to make sure that you're getting that support in there as well, because the FASD population can be a very vulnerable one, and we want to make sure that our children are being safe. So make sure that you're monitoring their social media, make sure that you're developing that relationship so they can come talk to you about these things. They're huge. But yeah, it's almost like I was told once by our doctors is that puberty with FASD is almost like puberty 2.0, because it's just a little bit extra. So just kind of prepare yourself for that and get some supports in place.
Okay, we have the big question here. Why do some kids with FASD get government funding and others don't? Catherine.
Yeah, that happens. That's true. That's real. That happens to a lot of families. And I want to say that the government funding, I'm assuming that we're talking about the disability tax credit form, as well as the special services at home, or SSAH. I can tell you that someone, as a parent who is raising children who receive funding, it's not necessarily what the diagnosis is, although that is important. It's more about the day-to-day functioning. So how you fill out these forms absolutely will impact if you get approved or not. How you talk about your child's functioning level is going to. So if some days they can dress themselves, but most days, they'd run out in their underwear in the middle of winter, but they can dress themselves, just understanding the meaning behind the questions that they're asking absolutely is going to impact whether you get approved or not, and absolutely your region as well. So if you have been denied, if your child has a formal diagnosis of FASD and they have been denied, please go back and advocate for some more. You can absolutely keep reapplying and get support in filling out these funding forms. I did a webinar, I believe last year, called SSAH Debunking the Myths, and we really talked about how exactly you can fill out those forms. And so I literally go by question about how what they're looking to see. And so it's not about embellishing or not being truthful about your child's needs, but it's also about knowing how to answer the question appropriately. It's frustrating, guys. I get it, and I appreciate that some people get it, some people don't, but it truly is regional, but also how you're filling out the forms.
Yeah, and that's something that we can help with as well, right? On a one-on-one level. And I'm going to share the link to the webinar in a moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and if you're stuck, like even having another set of eyes to review the forms that you filled out, like that's absolutely something that we can help support you with. I know that I've done that professionally, but also personally. So we appreciate how overwhelming these applications are.
Okay, I have a question from the live feed here. How can we help safeguard our children's self-esteem as they struggle with their social skills?
Yeah, that's very difficult. What we have found to be very helpful in our household, at least, is um, pursuing things that our kids are really good at. So for us, my son does not have many friends at school. He struggles very. He has a lot of struggles socially, and having those kind of friends and knowing the difference between friends and bullies, like those are all blurred lines in our life. We focus on things like karate because one, he's decent at it, and it's good because it's very instruction based. So there's no free play. It's you're doing your kata, you're doing the kicks, you're doing your blocks. So there's the social aspect of it, but there also is that engagement. So it's really helped build his self-esteem. Also, and I want to caution you with this as well, to make sure you know your child, but we were able to find an online community. So in our case, for our son, it was Roblox. And so again, everyone has their thoughts and feelings about children with video games, but we found that I actually have an account, and so I play with him. So it's a way for us to engage and to make sure that he's staying safe. But we found that it was a way for him to engage with peers in a different way that doesn't necessarily make him feel that he's apart or he's acting differently, or if he has to play the video game while sitting upside down because that's how he's going to get his sensory input, no one's going to know. So those are kind of ways that we've done it. And of course, we've been in counseling a lot to really help build those skills. And if you do have access or can have access to a child and youth worker, whether that's through your school or at home, I absolutely suggest with that because they can help with those little nuances like understanding facial expressions and understanding the difference between a friend and a bully. How do you not become a bully? Like those are things that have worked a lot with our children. So I definitely suggest building that and engaging them in some after school activities that can help build their own self-esteem.
And something which is kind of general about social skills and kids with special needs, sometimes if you're organizing play dates, keeping them quite short. So your kid's going to have a good hour with other kids as opposed to going for a sleepover and everything crashes and burns the next morning. Another thing that I would recommend is in terms of the activities they do, if being with lots of people is overwhelming for your child, then you might want to organize a one-on-one. And also think about the age of children that your child gets along with. Sometimes children who have some differences, some developmental or cognitive differences, they may get along really well with children who are a few years younger, or they may get along really well with children who are a few years older and take on more of a big sister brother role. So you don't always have to put them together with neurotypical peers and hope that it's all gonna work out for the best.
And I think as well, with Adopt for Life, we actually have a buddy program where you can actually be linked with other families in your area who have similar life challenges that you do. So there is a potential that if you reach out to your regional parent liaison, we can actually link you with another family who has a child in your same age range, and they can almost have their own play dates. And I did this once for my son, and he was so ecstatic to actually meet a child who also has FASD. And although he knows, he kept saying, "Oh, so it's not just me." And something would happen and the other child would react. He goes, "Oh yeah, I do that all the time." And they're really able to kind of validate. Again, we had to keep it short because I think they just kind of spun off each other, but it was a way for us as parents to connect and say, well, how are you dealing with this situation? But also a way for our kids to realize that they aren't alone in validating their own experience and emotions, I think was really helpful for us.
Yeah, it's a lot of work for a kid, for anyone, to try and keep up with other kids or behave like other kids. It's nice just to relax and be with someone whose behaviors might feel familiar and whose thoughts. Okay, so another question here. What resources are out there for families?
So I am really happy to say that it continues to grow. So 15 years ago, there were very limited resources. So again, if you're looking for more research and statistics and data, CanFASD is amazing. There are some really great Facebook online groups. So Red Shoe Rocks, Caregiver Success, Living with Broken Wings or Raising Broken Wings. Honestly, if you just type FASD, you'll find amazing support groups. And there's thousands of people, both those living with FASD who can give you supports. And I've done that myself. Is I've reached out to other adults living with FASD through online communities and said, this is what I'm experiencing. Can you give me some insight? And so I basically was able to get insights that way. Adopt for Life, we strive on providing resources and support. So we have great groups that if we don't have it, we can link you up with as well. And again, Health Nexus has really tried to keep FASD on the forefront. So there are FASD workers that you can engage with who sometimes can go into school case conferences with you. They can help you through the diagnostic process, give you visual schedules or whatever you need. And then of course, final plug, there's this amazing book that you can go that really gives your child, you know, the lead on talking about their story. And I think that's the most important thing is we want to make sure that our children continue to have a voice and that they remain at the steering wheel of sharing their stories.
Are there any support groups specifically for kids or for young adults?
So there are online that aren't a part of Adopt for Life that I'm aware of, but there are some for youth. Obviously, you don't want kids on Facebook, but for youth, there are groups. And I believe in Thunder Bay, Miranda, I'm not too sure if you're still on the live, but I believe Thunder Bay has groups where the parents meet and then the children meet as well. And so either it's they're starting to develop, or it exists where people can actually meet at the same time. And so I think they're trying to pilot that across the province as well, because it's so important.
Okay, so we have another question here from a parent or a prospective parent. We were recently matched with a youth with FASD and unsure if we should move forward. What advice would you give?
So I'm just going to go back to our experience when we were matched with our daughter who had 20-something diagnoses. It's scary. And I think the most important thing is going back to your own capacity as a parent and as a person. Go back to the basics. Is this something that you are able to support? Don't be so hung up on the actual diagnosis, but more what does this mean for the child? So if this wasn't FASD and this was some random syndrome that you've never heard of, you would want to look into what does that mean for day-to-day living? Again, FASD is a spectrum and it's going to affect everybody differently. So you want to really learn what the strengths are, what educational needs does the child have, what resources are in your community, are you close to developmental pediatricians who specialize in FASD? Are there groups? Are there supports for you? So absolutely, I think our first gut reaction when you hear a child has a specific diagnosis, it's, oh my gosh, can we handle this? This is absolutely a normal reaction. But learning about who the child is beyond the diagnosis, I think is what you want to try and focus on and making a decision if this is a good fit for your family or not.
And I just shared a link on the live feed. It's to a story that was written by Kristen Shepherd. And it's about what it was like to adopt 4 kids with FASD. Her kids are actually not diagnosed before the adoption. And it would I feel like it will give you a good sense of the day-to-day and what to expect, the challenges, and also all of the awesome stuff. Okay, so live feeds. This is your last chance. Any more questions, send them in. I believe we have one more, and then it's almost time to wrap up here. Do you really need confirmation of drinking to get an FASD diagnosis?
So that continues to be an ongoing conversation. I wish I could definitely say yes or no. I will answer for my region, and from my understanding in supporting families is that you do need some type of confirmation. What that confirmation is will vary depending on who is diagnosing the child. So in some cases, they will be asking for either a CAS confirmation or a doctor medical note saying yes, they were seeing a patient who is pregnant while drinking. That could be one part. Confirmation can also be a letter from the birth parent themselves, or they're a part of the diagnostics referral as well. But more recently, I have found that having a family member confirm that they saw drinking, or even there's been twice where previous case notes from a children's aid worker said that there was suspicion of drinking, and that was enough to get the referral. But absolutely, this is an ongoing battle, and you're going to go to every city and they're going to tell you 15 different things. So unfortunately, it isn't as streamlined, but I know that we as in the community is working really hard to advocate to keep it streamlined, but you absolutely need to have a legitimate suspicion and some type of confirmation. So whether that's a case note or a letter from someone saying that they've seen it.
That's it for the questions, Catherine.
Ooh, that was nice.
We actually got through everything. I'm impressed.
But usually with my rambling, I never know where we'll end up. So it's amazing.
I think that our 15-second answers on those recent Insta stories were good training for us both. Before you wrap up, Catherine, I just want to say a quick word to our community. Throughout the month of December, we're doing a fundraiser with Chapters Indigo. So anything that you want to buy from that site, whether it be books, gift cards, especially gift cards because we get more money for those, board games, toys, gift wrap. There's a link which I've been sharing relentlessly on our sites, and I'm going to put it into the live feed as well. If you make your purchases at Indigo through that link, then 3% of all the money you spend in Indigo will go directly to Adopt for Life. And if you buy gift cards, that goes up to 15%. Wow. So my little tip is buy the gift cards. We get the 15% and then go use them on the regular website afterwards. So yes, I really encourage you. There's lots of great stuff there, and they have some pretty sweet sales on at the moment as well. It seems like Cyber Monday has continued to Cyber Tuesday. Yeah, and let's see if we can start off the new year with as much support as possible for Adopt for Life. And Giving Tuesday is today as well. So we've also been sharing a lot of links about where you can go to donate to Adopt for Life for Giving Tuesday. The more we can take advantage of having our charitable status now, which we just got this year, the more we can fundraise and the more supports we can offer to kinship, customary care and adoptive families. And we'd love to be able to expand what we do in 2020.
Amazing. It is Giving Tuesday. That's exciting. Okay, so after you guys go to Indigo, let us know what you purchased and give us some recommendations because the holidays are coming. It's crunch time for sure. And just before we leave, I understand it's 1 o'clock and I don't want to monopolize anybody's time. Next week, unfortunately, the Snack and Chat is canceled. Just there is some significant scheduling difficulties on my end, but we are going to be resuming the following week. December 17th is basically surviving the holidays. So please make sure you have questions, and we'll definitely talk about all things of what we can do to survive through the holidays ourselves. And that December 17th will be the last web series before the new year. So because obviously we all are going to be a little bit chaotic with our children. Surviving. Exactly. We want to be trying to survive ourselves. So, but that being said, we are absolutely always here for you. to reach out to ask any questions. If you're seeing this on replay and you have a burning question, reach out to us. We're very accessible. Valerie, thank you so much again. And Miranda, thank you so much for sharing this book and for being available to answering questions if they came up. I really appreciate it. Hope you guys enjoyed the rest of your day, and we will see you in 2 weeks. Take care.
Bye.